We're going to talk about transubstantiation. This is the doctrine of the real presence of Christ in the Eucharist. And we use this term transubstantiation. We can break it down because of the meaning it has, that it is the change, trans, of the substance, substantiation, the change of the substance of bread and wine into the substance of the body and blood of Christ. Substance here not being the physical substance that we would think of in science, but the reality of a thing. So let's go over three key Catholic beliefs to kind of help clear up some minor misunderstandings. First of all, we as Catholics do believe that Jesus told us to literally eat his flesh and drink his blood. He did not speak metaphorically. Second, the bread and wine truly become the body and blood of Christ. This also, we are not talking about a metaphor. It truly becomes the body and blood of Christ. And then last but not least, the body and blood of Christ still look and still taste like bread and wine. So this should kind of clue us into, well, then something deeper is going on here, something that cannot be perceived by the senses. We get this transubstantiation kind of teaching ultimately from John 6. In the institution narratives of Matthew, Mark, and Luke at the Last Supper, Jesus said, "This is my body, this is my blood." We take him literally. Well, we go back to John 6 for kind of contextual teaching on this. Jesus calls himself the bread of life. He tells everyone that in order to have life, you must eat the flesh of the Son of Man and drink his blood. Well, if you take him literally, that's a problem, especially for Jews. That's why they murmured. Not only was it inappropriate or dishonorable to eat another human being, there was a law specifically for the Jews against it. And so Jesus could have gone one of two ways here. He could have continued teaching because what he was saying earlier and what we think he was saying is indeed what he's teaching, that we must eat his flesh and drink his blood. Or he was making a metaphor and he could use this opportunity to clarify. He doesn't do that. What he does is he intensifies his language. Instead of using the normal term to eat for eating the flesh of the Son of Man, which is phagain, he actually starts to use another verb, trogain, which goes a little more into the action of chewing and gnawing, and is a verb that would have only been used for animals. To chew on a bone or gnaw on a bone, or to chew the cud like for a cow that's going to grind the grain between its teeth. In doubling down that language and intensifying the language, he's really kind of intensifying what he's teaching, and that is, I am talking about you must eat the flesh of the Son of Man. And so many of these followers of his leave because they just cannot accept the teaching. And Jesus never stops them. The fact that he never stops them indicates that as a good teacher, they get the lesson. They just don't accept it. They can't accept it. And he even turns to his disciples at one point in time and says, "Are you going to leave me as well?" So we have to understand that Jesus did clarify when he needed to. In John 4, he says, "I have food to eat of which you do not know." Now, the disciples honestly think that he has food hidden in his tunic. Jesus clarifies and says, "No, no, no. My food is to do the will of my Father." Oh, okay. So he was making a metaphor. Matthew 16, he just says, "Look out and beware the leaven of the Pharisees." So the disciples are thinking that he's chastising them because they didn't bring any food. They were just previously discussing how they didn't have food and where they needed to go to get some. Jesus clarifies and says, "No, beware the leaven of the Pharisees and the Sadducees, their teachings which infiltrate the mind." All right. So he's clarified. He was making a metaphor there. Whereas in John 6, he's not, and that's why he doesn't clarify. And this can ultimately come back to that understanding that we talked about in the Passover meal, the Jewish understanding of Passover as a memorial meal. God acts within history. He acts in history and has throughout the lifetime of Israel. We, however, exist in a different time, meaning God acted in history through Jesus Christ on the cross, but we exist in a different time. And time can somehow collapse and we can be truly present to those actions in the past. And that's what happens at the Passover. That's what happens at the Eucharist. Jesus collapses time at the Last Supper because he says, "This is my body, this is my blood," when the crucifixion hasn't even happened yet on Friday. And so he kind of collapses time into the future by creating the sacrament of his offering, his sacrifice, his passion the night before. Whereas we have that collapse back in time, so to speak. Jesus divinely acts not only on the Thursday of the Last Supper, but also the crucifixion.